What are the best examples for all corporate greed? Nestle was under an enormous boycott in the 1970s-80s because of the baby formula scandal, impeding the progress of the internet in the US solely to improve their bottom line. Looking at you, Comcast. Stores like Walmart limiting most of their workers to 30 hours per week so that they don't have to provide benefits to them. The GM ignition scandal. They knew beforehand the risk of people dying and concluded that number of people dead was worth the money saved. Worked at Enron as first job out of college. In 2000 we were all called to a meeting and were strongly advised to take our end of year bonuses in Enron stock, knowing that a splurge of buys would drive up the price. Key executives had standing sell orders in place that triggered on a certain price. The take the stock instead of the bonus event triggered the higher price and the executives got to liquidate their soon to be worthless stock. To top it, they raided our 401k and left us all devastated. Comcast trying to charge me 14 months in a year. Every 5 months or so Comcast will push my billing date ahead by about 2 or 3 weeks, expecting me to pay it earlier or cutting off my services for delinquent payment. UK Home Secretary Theresa May is busy trying to force police forces into privatising core functions, like control rooms, custody detention facilities, by reducing funding. Her husband is a major shareholder in G4S, so she stands to gain massively if G4S wins lucrative police contracts. Somehow this isn't a conflict of interest and she is allowed to get away with it. My boss was facing a Youtube 3K bill to renew a safety license for our in-house cafeteria. He decided to close it instead, immediately firing the 2 kitchen staff and 50 other staff, losing all meal options. A week or 2 later, he then blows you a cute 30k on a marketing campaign he was repeatedly told would fail and we wouldn't recoup a single penny of the money spent. It was a total waste of time. He thought it was worth trying anyway. Totally doesn't mind wasting money away. And can afford to. But won't spend a penny on staff if he doesn't have to. Can't quite figure it out. Edit. Insteading too many insteads. There are a lot of infuriating examples in this thread, but I'd argue the worst cases are those which are harder to see. Many products are designed specifically to be more expensive to repair and easier to break simply to force a customer to buy a new one sooner than they might have needed to. The amount of waste, both environmentally and economically, from this type of practice, taken in aggregate, is staggering. In practice, even though the GDP might be higher, it does not help the economy because the money does not go as far on inferior products. The amount of resources wasted, the pollution created, and the labor misallocated are all costs we pay. And all for a worse economy. But it will continue to happen so long as it is in each company's best interest to hide the true cost per use from consumers, to artificially inflate the number of units they sell, even as companies spend more than they need to because they need to buy goods from other companies doing the same underhanded trick. FIFA taking all of the revenue from the World Cups and calling itself a non-profit. My wife's Hyundai has a remote start function, but you can't just use a key fob to use it. You have to pay them an annual subscription for BlueLink and use their smartphone app to start the car. Also, it's not included in the base rate for BlueLink but rather in the upgraded package. It's several $100s per year. My company went public a few years back. CEO announces that there will be no raises that year to ensure a good report for our investors. However, there will be bonuses. Hey. Alright. Cool. If you don't understand why this is shady, it's because execs mostly only get paid in bonuses and stock. So he and his pals all cleaned up, made a few mil, got a few 100,000 stock options. Sure, we as regular employees also got a handful of shares, 50, and an okay bonus, think 5% of salary. However, we as regular employees rely more on raises to keep our future net worth going, as that small bonus is a drop in the bucket compared to what they got long term. And friends, this is how every public company is run. Welcome to the fun. The monetization of the 9/11 terror attacks is pretty f-king bad. Literally any business that could started selling bullshit in memory of the fallen. Just really tacky bullshit too. Commemorative coins with pop-up towers. Collectible plates. Shitty movies. T-shirts. Bumper stickers. F-king everything. And there was almost no time in between from when the towers fell to when they started peddling their shit. Edit. Peddling, peddling. Video game companies selling more than one season pass for a game. That f-king bullshit. Tom's shoes. They come off as a charity. But they are in fact a for-profit organization. They sell $4 shoes for $60. But each time they sell you a pair of shoes, they give one to a child in Africa. Sounds good, right? But if the shoes in total cost $8, where does the remaining $52 go? Also, they use what is called poverty porn. They find the most extreme cases and make it look like the most common. Most children in Africa have shoes. And really, shoes are the least of their worries. You might worry about your shoes. They worry about motherfucking malaria. Also, giving free shoes to kids means local shoe salesmen go out of business. And this is ruining the local economy and community. But the kids don't understand those ramifications. So they gladly take the shoes. The Ford Pinto case. Pinto was a compact car launched in 70s. Ford was under pressure to launch it as soon as possible to compete with imported cars. Security checks revealed that the cars had a major design flaw that made it vulnerable to catching on fire. Knowing this, they still went with production because a few assholes did a cost-benefit analysis that stated that the expected cost of lawsuits, calculated by approximating the number of such incidences multiplied by 200k. The value of a human life was less than the cost of repair on all items, $11 per car. If that isn't ashlery of the highest degree, I don't know what is. The ATM scam. Banks started putting in ATMs to reduce lines at the banks, allowing them to hire fewer tellers by offloading simple tasks, typically withdrawals, to machines. They saved millions of dollars that way. Then someone decided they should charge money for using the ATM. Giving, not earning, the banks billions of dollars. The banks justify it by saying there's overhead involved in ATMs. There's no way that the overhead is that high. And their profit sheets corroborate that. Edit. It. Lots of people missing the point. I have no problem with banks charging a reasonable fee for ATM service. That's not the issue. The problem is with banks charging unjustifiably high fees for ATM service. Banks and ATM fees is like broadband providers and service fees. They charge hundreds or thousands of % more than they're putting into the service. That's outrageous. That's the scam. So many things involved in the gaming industry. FCK in particular. Valve releases free map pack for Left 4 Dead 2 on PC. Microsoft didn't want free DLC to be a thing and added like a $20 price tag to that same DLC for the Xbox. Some banks increase their bounced check fees by clearing the biggest check through an account first so that many smaller checks will then bounce. If they get $25 per bounced check and there are 10 other checks, they can then charge $250 instead of just $25 for the one big check. Sleazy. In the early 2000s, rating agencies like Moody's and S&P were basically rubber stamping any subprime mortgage bond as AAA, i.e. the safest investment you could make, because they were paid by the transaction and felt that if they didn't give AAA ratings, the banks would just have the other agency rate it instead, and B, they didn't actually understand what they were rating. So mortgage originators started making worse and worse loans, knowing they would be rated as AAA. And banks not only offloaded them to suckers but drank their own Kool-Aid and invested heavily in the subprime market until the global economy collapsed and everyone on Wall Street got a 6-7-figure severance package. Smaller scale, but I worked for the restaurant group as a waiter. It started off great actually. Then they started making changes. Dropped our hours, despite contracts saying 30 PW. Added potential shifts where you'd wait to hear on the day if you were needed. If you didn't show you got a telling off. Then what they did for their customers. They had decent food for a year and a half. Then they decided to cut the sizes of the meals down and raise the prices. So as a thank you to customers they essentially charged more for less. The food was worse too. That's so scummy to me and shows a real disrespect to your employees and customers. If you're helping neither of them, what really are you doing? Iran voted to nationalize its oil industry and kick British Petroleum out of the country. BP then went to the US and UK governments for help. The CIA and British CIS backed a coup that overthrew the democratically elected prime minister and gave more power to the monarch. Iran's hatred towards the West stems directly from this event. The US and UK helped destroy one of the most progressive and secular governments in the Middle East at the time, all in the name of corporate profit. It's a minor example, but it always pissed me off when Gillette came out with that indicator strip to tell me when it's time to change my razor. It's like BTCH, I'll decide when to throw out this $6 blade. And it's going to be when shaving hurts so much that I wake up the next morning debating calling in sick just so I don't have to shave. Not when some stupid line turns white. Glad they got rid of it. Enron is a good example of corporate greed as it relates to what capitalism allows for. The use is an accounting practice that basically let them account for future profits that hadn't arrived yet, but they had the deal signed. They took this so much to the extreme that they ended up underwater without any actual real cash flow. Thousands upon thousands of people lost millions of dollars in stock and retirement options. The CEO, Ken Lay, died from old age before he could be prosecuted. And his main partner in crime, Jeff Skilling, actually had his original sentence reduced for good behavior. http www.pbsnews.com News X Enron seer Jeff Skilling to leave prison early. He won't have as much as he did when he went into prison. But he'll still have a couple million when he comes out. My ISP have a sophisticated monitoring tools, and if some switch or cable lane goes down, it automatically create a trouble ticket for this problem. But they don't stop billing process. You need to call center and say my internet is not working. Or you will pay for broken service. Oreos packaging. Their recommended serving size is 2 cookies. And yet there is always an odd number of cookies in the package. They are saving money. One frustrating cookie at a time. I don't know if this was already posted, but I want to make sure it is known. In 2004, the US decided to give companies a tax holiday where they could bring money back into the country at a lower tax rate. The government was very clear that they were doing this so that these companies could create jobs with the money they repatriated. There were guidelines laid out and everything. Several companies proceeded to bring in billions of dollars and then laid off massive amounts of employees. The exact opposite of what they were told to do. Pfizer and Hewlett-Packard are 2 companies that did this. You may remember that Cully Fiorina is known as the HP CEO who laid off thousands of workers. This was when that happened. Many of these companies used the repatriated dollars to do share buybacks, essentially boosting their share price without actually doing anything productive to make that happen. They could have reinvested the money back into their companies, or handed out raises, or hired new people. But instead they used shady tactics to manipulate their stock prices upward. You know who gets bonuses when stock prices increase? The CEO of the company. If you want to learn more, read this article. http www.wsj.com articles SB100014240526331045766237710221298888. Most insurance companies, they are fine with you paying them loads of money every month. But as soon as you have a bad accident of some sort, you need to either pay loads more, or they just flat out drop you. Since all the good ones have been mentioned, I'll say Coke and Pepsi going to great lengths to convince consumers that tap water and Brita filters are bad and only bottled water is good for you. Except a lot of bottled water has been proven to just be tap water. The company I work for was doing a coffee for the troops promotion, where customers buy a bag of coffee and we send it to the troops. All the coffee we sent was 2 months out of date. Was just a ploy to sell otherwise unsaleable product. Company actually donated nothing. Forza Motorsport and whatever corporation you want to blame as a responsible party. Up to about Forza 4 the game was okay. But then the makers started cutting out content like tracks and cars and adding it back in as DLC. So for Forza 1-4 you paid $60 for a game with lots of tracks and cars. Forza 5 you pay $60 for a game that has a fraction of the cars and tracks. And then the company releases a DLC pack for an additional $20 as well as VIP pass that costs another $50. Both of which simply add in the stuff that was removed from the base game. Things that Forza 4 had as part of the base $60 game. So now to play the same game with the same content that was once $60, you now have to pay $130. Imagine if Madden 2016 came out and EA said, oh, you want to play as the Patriots? That's a $5 DLC pack. Same with the Broncos and the Ravens. And $5 per stadium that you want to play in. But the Miami Dolphins are still included in the base game, which still costs $60. I stayed at a homeless shelter in Orlando. FL that was a complete shithole. Except for the fancy Coke machine in the courtyard that had a digital display. Accepted credit cards, cash, and coins. Way to prey on the homeless. Everything in this thread is legitimately shitty. But I've never been able to wrap my head around the phrase corporate greed. How do you define greed? Most definitions come really close to simply in the pursuit of profits, which is why they exist. It's like getting made a sports team for trying to rack up wins and championships. My mother worked for a very large healthcare company for over 30 years. They laid her off a couple years ago because she was basically making too much money. They let her go and hired someone out of college to pay them half what she was being paid. Apple and other companies pretending that they are based in Ireland to avoid paying billions in taxes to the country that is the only place in the world where they could have started. I work for a wheelchair company, and while we were testing a new feature on the chair, things kept going wrong. It wasn't passing compliance. One day the CEO of the company came into the office and said, "I don't care what the compliance lawyer says about the stability of the chair. All I need is a mathematician to add up how much I'm going to make off this thing." Please note I am the lowest of the low and probably should not have ever been able to hear this. But he said it in front of the entire office. Walmart naming itself as the main beneficiary of sick employees so that when they die Walmart gets an $80 check instead of the family of the employee. F-king disgusting. I'm getting laid off so that they can make my position part-time and for less money. They had the audacity to offer me that position. No way in hell would I agree to do my current full-time job part-time and for less money. They had the audacity to offer me that position. No way in hell would I agree to do my current full-time job part-time. Watch the Netflix documentary called The True Cost. It shows the horrible conditions and extremely low pay laborers that clothing factories make. Companies like H&M, Gap, Zara, Forever 21 and more use fast fashion, which is when you make clothing super cheap to compete with their competitors. Because of these low prices, the people who actually make the clothing are the ones who pay the price. Watch the movie. It'll change your whole view on the clothing industry. The housing bubble that caused the global financial crisis of 2007-08 in the States. Rather than the companies being at fault for ruining the economy, the Bush administration allotted a tax state-paid $700 billion buyout. Best thing about it was that the CEOs that caused this crash got away with fraud and were paid multi-million to $100 million plus bonuses. The simultaneous demonization and criminalization of marijuana in the USA. The lumber, tobacco, oil, pharmaceutical, and textile industries couldn't bear the thought of losing a piece of their market share to a product that could be grown in every American backyard. The dumbasses should have just gotten in on it and capitalized on the amazingly vast and varied potential of cannabis. Disney firing their entire IT staff and replacing them with H-1B Indian immigrants at minimum age. All the while forcing them to train their own replacements. The defense industry and the Pentagon. During the biggest operations, the Pentagon misplaced $2.5 trillion. Yes, trillion. No idea where it went. Halliburton used substandard labor and material in Iraq. Soldiers were electrocuted while taking showers. Too tired to cite more examples. The publicly traded company that I work for, like many companies, is feeling the pinch due to low oil prices. Yet somehow, they were able to pay out bonuses to various employees because it was included in the budget. All the senior VPs and executive management team members were offered the chance to take pay cuts from their multi-million-dollar salaries so that us minions could keep our jobs. That was quickly turned down. Now layoffs happen every month. They preach that travel should be limited and only in economy class. Yet a senior VP flies down every month to our office to give us an hour presentation on corporate mumbo jumbo. Yet he flies business first class for his 4 hours flight from corporate headquarters and can't be bothered to fly like a peasant because he's representing the company. Tons of do what I say, not what I do going on where I work. Corporate lobbyist lawyers writing the laws they want passed, then paying off congressmen to pass those laws. Generally these laws 1. Weaken consumer rights, 2. Impose onerous regulations, in the name of consumer protection, on industry startups, to prevent competition, the real purpose. Combined, these effects keep prices and profits high. Andrew Carnegie hired the old-time equivalent of Blackwater to try and force his striking workers back to work. At gunpoint. The reason they were on strike was because he was forcing unsafe working conditions and 12-14 plus hour days in an effort to keep deals he didn't have the infrastructure to make. The reason he made the deals, however, was because it would give him a monopoly on American steel production. In the 1920s, meat packing plants were a prime example of corporate greed. Upton Sinclair actually wrote a book about it, called The Jungle. If you ever want to become a vegetarian, read that book. He wrote about how the factories would mix in paper and rope, sometimes even plain garbage, just to fill up the vats and use less meat. But wait, there's more. They'd sometimes ship meat to England. They did the right thing and rejected the moldy, rotting meat. The factory would then ship it back to the US and mix the even moldier, rotten, decaying meat in with the next batch. If you mix in 5 tons of crap with 1,000 tons of meat, no one will notice. But you saved 5 tons of meat for the next batch. They'd also use chemicals to change the odor and smell. This is the worst. Injuries were very common. Fingers would often be cut off and mixed in. There was at least one case of a worker falling into the mixing vats. They couldn't get him out, and they didn't want to throw out the batch, so they sold meat with human remains in it. I was told this was very rare, but it's still crazy. The Meat Inspection Act required government inspectors to inspect the meat for undesirable ingredients, such as human remains. I'm sure some of this still happens today, just to a lesser extent. TLDR. Meat packing used to have no quality control at all. When I used to work for Boeing, I had deleted all my emails so that one from the union about voting to lose our pension was right above a record profits email from the seer. Bhopal's gas leak at the Union Carbide plant, also known as Bhopal gas tragedy. Long story short, shitty Western factory leaks gas into the environment causing cancer, bleeding disorders and all sorts of shit. How does the West says sorry? Build a hospital and then start outsourcing dodgy AF clinical trials to it and testing new medicine on the sick people by getting them to sign consent forms in English which majority of them do not understand and which are not translated for them. Oh, and most are also illiterate in their own language, so. Well, the drugs being tested also caused cancers and shit, so that was the icing on this particular cake. Or maybe it was Big Pharma vehemently denying the correlation between the drugs and the new melodies. Or the fact that this isn't a bigger case than it actually is. There's an interesting investigative piece about this on the Al Jazeera site. 1984 or 5. Living in Hawaii. Co-worker shares a story about Bank of Hawaii. His auntie was a manager. The bank found out at year's end that someone had added an extra decimal point to the mortgages of every bar loan on Oahu. Borrowers had paid extra millions of dollars. The managers had a meeting, gave themselves bonuses, and agreed we will never speak of this again. Nice. In Australia, our 7/11 stores are a great example of corporate greed. They were reported paying their workers under minimum wage, and some were paid half the hourly wage. So to make the hourly wage, they had to work for 2 hours. After everyone found out about this, they started paying their workers about $14 an hour. What people didn't realize was that the workers would get the money, but at the end of the week, the managers would take a certain amount of it in order for the cashiers to maintain their job. They basically just say, if you want to keep your job, pay me $200 at the end of the week. Double quote. JPay is a privately held corrections-related service provider based in the United States with its headquarters in Miramar, Florida. The company contracts with state departments of correction, DOC, county jails, and private federal prisons to provide technologies and services including money transfer, email, video visitation and parole and probation payments to approximately 1.5 million inmates throughout 35 states. Fees for money transfers routinely add up to 40% of money owed to inmates. JPAY Wiki. Late but irritating. Many of the classic British pubs are being bought up by large multinational firms. They will rent the pub to you, but you must buy the overpriced beer from them, and only them. Doesn't sound too bad. But if you realize that it is very hard to open a new pub, due to licensing laws, you end up with streets in the UK selling overpriced piss water instead of proper real ale, as all the pubs are owned by hedge fund front companies. The pubs shut every few months for new management as the pub rent is so high it is near impossible to make a living. Maybe not Monsanto level. I was forced by a member of HR to write a report on my supervisor who was causing major problems in the workplace. Next day, yesterday, on my way to work, I get a call informing me that the company had decided to let me go. The supervisor had been doing a lot of things that made the company eligible for multiple lawsuits. Where I live, if you aren't currently working for a company, you can't take legal action against it. So I was fired and the supervisor still works there. Walmart is the tops. As mentioned, they avoid the ACA regulations by reducing hours to 30. They also, until recently, purposely made wages as low as possible and encourage employees to sign up for welfare food stamps. They also had a dead peasants insurance that was covered in some documentaries. And finally, the best of them all, after 9/11 they purchased every American flag they could to corner the market. Greed, Mr. Gecko, is not good. I think that C-suite employees where their compensation is tied directly to the price of their stock makes them take more risky choices and makes them raise prices to allow corp earnings continue to rise. This in turn screws the consumers because prices rise and their salaries stay the same. All of this so the stock price will appreciate so they make more money without any real risk. Firestone tires. They knew there was a high likelihood of tire wall separation which could cause a catastrophic failure, which would be deadly at highway speeds. They calculated the cost of a recall and compared that to what they thought they'd lose in lawsuits and decided to let people die. The Bell Company's refusal to offer DSL service in the early days of the internet in order to force a costly instant service on them. To this day, I will not do business with any of the Bell Companies or their offshoots. When Dent Donuts acquired my Dunkin' Donuts store, we were no longer allowed at night to take home the throwaway baked goods. We were also banned from taking food out of the store after a shift, i.e., taking food on break then finishing it in the car on the way home. Both of these are punishable by termination. Double quote. Questrade wouldn't let me take my money out of my account because they said I didn't have enough money. FCKU. Questrade. Questrade is a piece of shit. They slammed me with hidden charges and fees, which they originally said wouldn't exist. Serious answer is large corporations profited immensely directly or indirectly from colonialism, slavery, the Holocaust, etc. In fact, some historians would argue that modern corporations were formed through the process of colonialism, the British Dutch East India Companies, the Hudson Bay Company, etc. This continued to World War II, with German companies like BMW or Japanese Aibatsu like Nissan profiting immensely from some of the worst atrocities of the war. It's not to blame state policy on corporations necessarily, but it's evident from clear historical records that large corporations in the very least enthusiastically supported atrocities if they were profitable. But that's the serious answer. The first thing that came to mind is that tomatoes and strawberries taste like flavorless mush now. They make more money selling us shit. Supermarkets jack up the price, and real fruit and veg are labeled as organic and sold at many times the price that they were before GMOs, pesticides, etc. FCK that shit.